You're listening to E-commerce Fastlane, the podcast show to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company, powered by Shopify. Listen to real conversations with partners and subject matter experts as they share proven practical strategies, platforms, and the best Shopify apps to help you accelerate your business. The time is now for you to improve efficiencies, grow revenue, profit, and lifetime customer loyalty. Please welcome your host, startup founder and strategic advisor, Steve Hutt.
Welcome back to E-commerce Fastlane. I'm your host, Steve Hutt. Now today, we're going to dive into something that I think is, this may sound funny, but I think it's silently killing a lot of Shopify stores. And I think a lot of merchants don't even realize this is actually going on. You know, if you've ever wondered why maybe your store feels a little bit sluggish, or maybe you download a new app, you know, maybe kind of a duct tape solution here, but you download something, but then you find out that it's not playing nicely with other pieces of technology that you might have also connected to your store. And this is why I have my guest on today. This is what he likes to call these hidden revenue killers, and the technical term is more technical debt that happens with Shopify stores. And believe it or not, this is a reality. And so my guest today is Paolo Vidali, and he is the founder and CEO of a company called Hidden Gears, and they're at hiddengears.com. They are a digital agency. They definitely specialize in kind of solving a lot of these complex kind of technical challenges that are facing a lot of kind of growing and scaling Shopify brands, really dealing with their tech stack. Because I think, you know, he uses the word, and so do I, these kind of Band-Aid duct tape solutions that are kind of happening. I think what also happens a lot, and I found that even being in Shopify, is that whenever I take on a new account, the first thing I do after my introduction is I go into their apps and I take a look and I do a quick app audit, and I say, okay, why is it? Let's go from top to bottom. Why did you choose all of these? And number one, in fact, are you using them? And number two, do they talk to each other? Like, are you getting the results that you were hoping to get out of it? And there's two great experiments that happened on this. Number one is like, oh my God, I didn't know I even had that app in there, because that was my marketer 2 years ago, and it's $500 a month. You got to be kidding me. And so that happens a lot. And then the other side of it, and then so that's saving them some money. So they're right out of the box. They're happy they migrated to Shopify Plus. But then the second side is like, wow, okay, I didn't realize that Klaviyo doesn't speak nicely with this other kind of like LTV product that we had that I was helping me figure out the next best customer and yada, yada, yada. And you didn't realize that they weren't talking to each other, or there's multiple silos of data that have no value. So that's what I'm hoping to get out today. I really want to teach people, thanks to Paolo, about what's actually going on in the Shopify ecosystem right now as it relates to technical debt, and maybe come up with some ideas about like how you can actually improve that overall better customer experience and stuff like that. So hi, Paolo, welcome to E-commerce Fastlane.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
We just spoke before recording, and you're in sunny Hawaii right now, and this is great. I'm so happy that no matter where there's great talent and opportunity, I want to make the opportunity to meet people and learn. And you and I kind of like learned of each other like over the last few weeks. Is, you know what, let's jump on a call and let's get something recorded, because it's really important. It's a topic that I've never ever discussed in my 8 years podcasting. Your episode, I don't know, 408 or something. Technical debt, even though maybe, as I mentioned at the top of the show, it's a standard thing that I do, but I think a lot of people don't realize the importance of team members coming and going and not understanding what's actually going on in the Shopify admin. And so let's talk a little bit about this whole technical debt concept, and let's see how it's like what's the lay of the land right now from what you see?
Sure. Yeah. I think a lot of people wouldn't know how to define it per se,
No.
but they know
True.
the shape of it, and they know what it feels like. And so I tell folks a lot of times, if you're having meetings with your team and everyone's trying to debug something or figure out why is it every time we launch a product, or we do this big feature launch, or we do the new catalog, or whatever is going on, it just feels hard, and it just feels like we have to jump through all these hoops and we have to do all these things. Sometimes, okay, that's a production problem, or that's a back end of the business problem, but a lot of times it can be that you're trying to do things that aren't efficient, and they could be more efficient, but you don't have the time to do them because you're a growing business and you're just using what you have or what was built, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. And maybe adding an app every time you need to do something because it's a faster way to do it. And in the end of the day, you end up with the situation where things are kind of getting slower, things are buggier, you're getting weird customer reports through the CS team, and all of those stack up. And that's really technical debt to me is the kind of amalgamation of liabilities that you've incurred by growing the business. And sometimes that manifests as site speed, sometimes that's ADA compliance, and sometimes it's just straight up browser errors and things that are creating issues which impede conversion. And then other times, you're not really investing in it because it's just taking a little longer to do X, Y, and Z. But at the end of the day, if you add all that time up, you realize, oh wait, we could have been deploying faster, developing faster. We wouldn't have to make compromises on design because we have this legacy system that we have to support. And it really just slowly creeps up on you.
Kind of reminds me, I remember having a few brands that I managed when I was at Shopify, and this was when headless became this popular topic. Now sometimes I question that now, even with Shopify's own kind of architecture with hydrogen and oxygen. But it's interesting where a lot of people were migrating to Webflow or Contentful or other types of CMSs on the front end, then just using Checkout API or the Checkout extensions, and only using Shopify's Checkout component only for that. And that happened. But then people don't realize the refactoring of having two dedicated CMSs kind of running in real time, you need all the Shopify data and product data in the carts, in the cart and the admin, but then you also have to have Contentful and Webflow running. And now you don't realize and then a lot of brands didn't realize the headless problem now of having two CMSs and having like a senior sys administrator or a director of e-commerce that really understands what the hell is going on here, because it can get quite complicated.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at this point, we've migrated as many people out of headless as into headless.
I know.
We took over a headless project a few years back where the agency that built it had gone out of business. And then ultimately the deployment tool that was being used to stitch, Shopify and Contentful and so forth together, that went out of business. And it was just wild. I mean, it was just every day we were scratching our heads going, okay, well, to support this, this is going to take an hour. But if we were just on Shopify as a platform, this would take 5 minutes. And the whole reason you kind of use Shopify is because a lot of stuff that used to be, almost impossible in Magento would take 5 minutes in Shopify, right? So that's absolutely the case. And I think you have to be extremely cautious about jumping into projects like that are so deep unless you really have an in-house dev team or you have just a scale of resources where, you have, let's say, more than 30 or 40 team members. It's really, going headless is the fastest way to incur technical debt. I can tell you that.
Oh gosh. Yes, I know the migration path backwards because I had two brands, even of the 40 that I managed at one time at Shopify, two I know made that conversion back because they got on that hype train that it was a better way to do it. And it was, it made it more, you could create a better front end customer experience by having direct access to a more robust CMS. But the reality is that's all gone now with the way that Shopify has their blocks and stuff like that and design elements now. It's a non-negotiable now.
Yeah, I think there's still a few things about Shopify that are clunky, particularly for brands that are doing a lot of content marketing. I mean, yes, you can make sections and blocks and dynamic templates and now AI-driven blocks, but then you also have to have a template file for every single blog post. And we have some clients who've been working with for almost a decade who have hundreds and hundreds of posts. That is also incurring its own kind of weird version of technical debt where your theme starts getting huge, right? And there's implications from that. What we ended up doing to kind of bridge the gap between what we'd call a quote unquote real CMS for content marketing and Shopify CMS, which is basically, to date has been a word editor kind of style thing, is creating our own shortcode system a la WordPress where we have the ability to drop these little tags into the actual, description area of the article admin and then have those render as, fancy HTML and CSS on the front end without needing to go headless. And I think a lot of people gotten very creative over the years, that sort of out of necessity as a result.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Eh? I know I had a brand that I managed called Bulletproof Coffee, and they're at bulletproof.com, which is interesting what they have. They have the technical chops to be able to handle this, but what they do, just more of an FYI, you're talking about like the whole content marketing side and building a community around content and just brand content. Is what they did is on the front end of bulletproof.com is running on WordPress. And but they have exactly the same site running on shop.bulletproof.com. It looks identical on the homepage of each CMS. But what they do is they do have it synced in real time. They're using a really good search tool. So no matter where you're searching, either on the content marketing kind of engine running at bulletproof.com, which is WordPress, a little more robust, whatever search tool they're using there, they reveal both content topics like in blog posts and different things, but they also give product recommendations by querying the Shopify like product records and then collection records and stuff. So it's pretty neat how they've done it. Now they do run two CMSs, like I said, but you can't really tell that's the case.
Yeah, right. That's critical, is making that jump between. Of course, that does have the risk of cross-domain attribution and various pixel issues, but we've definitely done that as a hybrid approach for folks who particularly have a strong or large retail presence, multiple physical locations, et cetera, and they might have an industry-specific POS that really needs to be tied into that and isn't going to play well with Shopify, but online sales are still a good chunk of their business, and you look at that type of hybridized approach too.
Absolutely. All right, I want to talk a little bit about vibe coding. It's a topic, and I think this is all part of the technical debt challenge. And I'll get you to describe what it is in a moment. But one thing I find interesting is that I think there was an Israeli startup that, I don't know, maybe not even a year old, and we started, and then they just had like incredible growth. I think it was called Base 44. Is that it was recently acquired by Wix, which is another kind of competing platform for e-commerce. And so, can you talk about what is vibe coding, and why do you think it opens up the Pandora's box, so to speak, of potential more technical debt?
Sure. Yeah. So vibe coding was a term that I think was sort of thrown out there on Twitter by a developer maybe 6 or 8 months ago. And that's kind of just the speed things are going right now with AI.
Yeah,
but
I know.
It's, the concept that you can loosely describe what you're interested in building. You're like, hey, if I had an app, I would love it to, be able to log in and do this and do that. And just as you would describe it to someone, let's say it's your elevator pitch or at a party or to your spouse, AI will listen to that and say, oh, okay, you want that? I'll just build that. And then you can generate thousands and thousands of lines of code. You can do no code deploy where everything's hosted and has its own database or other means of storage. And all of a sudden, boom, you just have a web app in maybe it's, 15 minutes. Maybe you spent 3 hours on it. Maybe you spent 30 days on it. But either way, you are not actually yourself coding. You might use it as a running start if you are a developer and say, okay, we just vibe coded a web app that sort of roughed out the framework and as a prototype. And now we're going to take it and, make it do what it really needs to do. But a lot of folks have come up to me knowing that I'm developer and have this agency and saying, oh, like, look at this thing I just built, or, this is my side hustle, or I did this for my, nonprofit I volunteer for, et cetera. And people are just spinning up these apps, really never having coded anything for the web before, not even making their own web page. And all of a sudden you're able to make something that has database and has interactions and has all these features and so forth. And then it, a lot of times free / at a very low cost. And so it's really kind of changing the paradigm in terms of what is possible at what speed with what budget for web software development. And, I think it's even for folks like me who are sort of, senior developers or been doing this for close to 20 years, it's sort of not that impressive. It's, it goes so far and then it hits a wall and then you're like, okay, well, it got 80% of the way there, but it is almost impossible to get to the last 20% without actually doing development, right? But we're also so early, it's so fresh, and this is something that's always going to just keep going and keep developing. So what it means is, really is that you can create things that live on the web and take information or even just taking traffic, and you basically probably have no idea how that functions.
You don't.
And you might not even know the language it was in, like the name of the language, or does it have dependencies? What's a dependency? What libraries is it using? What's a library? Like, there's so much there where you get in these situations where you paint yourself in the corner, and without realizing it, if you can Google enough to figure out how to generate an API key and get it in there, you might not know that it's, hard coded in, and it's posted a public repo for you, and it's done all these things that are wildly against the best practices of anyone building anything for the web. And, I don't want to totally rain on the parade, because I really believe the web has changed the world in the democratization of technology. And then this is really a kind of an iterative step forward in making it more accessible. And it sort of parallels other things Shopify is doing. We're an e-commerce agency. We solely work on Shopify Plus. Now you have these other kind of iterative aspects of vibe coding, like Shopify just released their Horizon theme framework, which has AI theme blocks. So you can describe the type of section or block you would like in your theme, and it will go through, I think it's powered by Claude, and just make that for you in real time and generate that code. And so really what it's allowing people to do is just iterate really quickly, build things really quickly, and that's great. But then you can also end up with a situation where you have no design standards anymore. You have people building UX who don't know what UX is or why it's important, or like what is the strategy behind that. And so things can get really messy. I think in the experimentation phase is great, but the point is dangerous.
I'd argue too a bit about the exponential kind of debt accumulation that can happen, because I'm sure that vibe coding, once again, I don't believe it's actually a bad technology, but I just think it's iterating, and then people just need to use it wisely. But the weird thing is that these are AI generated solutions. It almost seems like you said, you don't even know what a library is. It becomes almost this black box. And soon what's going to happen is people are going to be building on top of foundations they don't even really comprehend. And that creates more like maintenance nightmares, and future developers kind of inherit a lot of like old systems, or no clear, as you said, no clear design or UX, no documentation. They don't understand the logic around what the hell they're building.
Yeah, and when it works, right? And it could be great.
Yeah.
But if anything goes wrong, who knows how to fix it? Who knows where to begin? And instead of saying, oh, that'll take 30 minutes to fix because I know that's in that file that handles that function that does this thing, you're just like looking at it from starting from scratch, right? And yeah, it's a perilous situation to be in. It feels like magic when it works, right? The other thing that happens that in our own experimentation with it, we've been noticing is that right now, in the process of trying to revise what it's initially done, you ask it to do something, outputs all this stuff, you click around, you play with it, and oh, okay, this isn't exactly what I asked for. And you ask, actually, could you, keep all of this stuff intact, but just change this one thing? What happens now is, to my knowledge, most, if not all of the models, essentially are rewriting every single time you ask for a revision. And so you might say, oh, just make this button purple, let's say. And then you refresh it after that ask and you notice, well, wait, now the menu's gone. Or wait, there's this text down here. Where did that come from? And so the amount of resources that are being sort of wasted on that, and the amount of time you end up getting it to try to undo the things that you actually didn't ask for, that it's sort of guessing that maybe you wanted or hallucinating into existence, becomes a really inefficient process. And so there is a point in which, calling in professionals or having developers actually work on developing makes sense. And I'm sure that will improve over time. But right now, it's actually quite hard if you specifically know the parameters and you do have UX standards and you do have kind of a roadmap and you're used to building software with teams. It's hard to get quality out of it in the way that you would expect because of those, kind of diversions that happen along the way.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting too is around the security vulnerabilities, which is kind of another topic that I want to discuss, because I feel that these implications are like pretty concerning from my perspective. Like, I'm not a developer, but I can understand that when, a lot of your foundation is coming from AI generated things, then all of a sudden Like, are you exposing API keys, or are you, I just think not understanding how AI and what best practices are from a security standpoint. So maybe let's talk about the technical debt as it relates to maybe security. I mean, for me, I'm thinking like, old customizations or outdated apps or integrations that Shopify have. What's your thought process around that? And like, what are you doing about it?
Yeah. So as it relates to vibe coding, people might ask, well, why does it matter if the key gets out? What can they do with the key? Well, they can build other software for them with your key. And if you're hooked up to a payment method, you could use $10,000 in API calls
Pretty
on
quickly.
your credit card, that you're going to pay for. And you can't say, well, I never authorized that. I'm going to do a chargeback. That doesn't work. So you have a potential cost liability there. In a traditional sense, looking at a pre-AI world, technical debt we've been most concerned with is, hey, you hire a random freelancer off Upwork, or you had a developer who left, or there's just been a revolving door of people kind of coming in, working on the site. You had 5 different app companies connected as collaborators, doing customizations, et cetera. You forgot what users had access to what, et cetera. I mean, honestly, we've had past clients that we worked with 5 years ago where I still have access to certain things. I've tried to get out of it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can't remove ourselves out of it. And email them, can you not share this with me? But that's a concern, and hiring folks, who may not be scrupulous. Like, there can certainly be backdoors in, there can be data leakage. Your customer data is extremely valuable. And I've noticed there are some free apps that provide a lot of value, but don't charge anything. Why is that? Well, they have access to your entire site and all of your customer data. What do you think might be monetizing their service, right? It's fueled and funded by data. So you have to be cautious about that. And I would recommend doing regular checkups and saying, maybe it's every month or every quarter, we go through our user list, we go through our app list, we go through, and actually look at what's been done, because there's certainly been many, many cases where if we start working with a new client, we go in, we haven't touched the code base before. We're like, what is this pixel? What is this thing? What is that thing? And often they don't even know. And we're like, well, we're going to guess that maybe this was a marketing agency from 3 years ago that you worked with, right? That's still, maybe they're getting your data, maybe they just forgot and the service is down. But if you don't know, that's where your greatest liability is, because, there's always folks who are trying to break in and so forth. And Shopify in general, I think, has been a great platform for security, for scalability, for managed hosting. It's one of the reasons we like it. I came from the world where there were custom carts and, raw Magento builds on, open bare rack servers and all kinds of chaos that could ensue from that. But in general, if you don't know and you don't know what to ask and where to go and where to look, that's going to continue to stack up over time.
Yeah. So what about from a customer experience perspective? Like, would there be any technical debt happening on that end? Because usually when I think about that, there's a couple different things here. I think some people are adding on solutions to their Shopify store. If it's, let's say, Gorgeous, for example, as their CRM, they may use the chat widget to kind of maybe help triage some of the, where's my order, what's my tracking number, what's your return policies and basic stuff like that. But I also think there's lots of other kind of front end customer experience things that can almost be clunky or have some issues and challenges, or like I said, top of show, not talking to each other. So it's actually not a great kind of customer experience. So what are you seeing on the front end right now?
Sure. Yeah. And the front end, I mean, technical that can definitely lead to site speed issues, to ADA compliance issues, pixel conflicts. Like, again, you have a bunch of marketing pixels and all of a sudden, Pinterest ads isn't registering, or GA is double firing, all this kind of thing where you're trying to debug how come this tracker isn't actually tracking what we want it to, or how come this experience is subpar. For site speed, I really caution people completely chasing Core Web Vitals and thinking that, site speed is just going to magically boost or fix or whatever to your SEO. It's really one of hundreds and hundreds of factors. However, in general, our philosophy is that perceptible site speed is important. Okay, the scorecards and the benchmarks and all that is good for developers to try to, push as much as they can. But if the site feels slow, it really doesn't matter what the score is. You want a perceptibly snappy experience for your users. And if there's certain, points in the conversion funnel where that's slowing down or things are glitchy or, wait, I thought I added some to my cart, but now I have to refresh and now it says it's not there. All these things can really affect what's the actual perceptible experience. And then, of course, then conversion. And particularly with folks who have really deep product catalogs or complex products or doing fancy things like, doing virtually merchandise products where you actually have 5 different products, but they're linked together and it switches dynamically as you change the color and you change, let's say, the fit, etc. It's really big in apparel. We had a client that we took over the site years ago, but their agency, I think, had gone under or they stopped working with that developer. And they had this weird bug where it just seemed like maybe once out of every 50 times someone used the product page, they would end up adding the wrong size to their cart. And it was always the smallest size, which is, of course, is the first variant that's available. And we're like, we didn't isolate it to the browser, but customer service kept doing these returns and exchanges because it just would get the product and be like, I don't need an extra small or I don't need a whatever. So, and come to realize that there's something going on and it was just completely confounding. Like didn't seem to have any reproducible rhyme or reason. Like the first thing we do when we debug something is we establish a pattern. What are the commonalities that we can get this to actually occur and then work backwards from there as why is it happening? So we ended up having to do this audit of thousands of lines of JavaScript. They had minified it, which means, they compressed it for speed, which usually is good, but it's bad if you don't retain a copy of the uncompressed version because it makes it extremely difficult to read even as a programmer. And they created all these variables in the minification process where instead of saying, oh, the variable is, PDP button or something like that, it's just the letter A and the letter B and the letter C and the letter D. So you use every single letter of the alphabet, both lowercase and uppercase, including uppercase O, which looks exactly like a 0, right? And it was nearly incomprehensible. Thousands of lines of this. And so we had to basically write on a whiteboard and we had a sort of beautiful mind crazy wall where we were just writing out all the different, T equals B, but then it's multiplied by M, which then later gets transformed into X. I mean, it was wild. And at the end of the day, end of actually several days, we figured out that in one line, in one place, there was someone had typed a semicolon instead of a comma. And that was enough to create a browser error in, 5% of the time in browsers randomly based on a memory escape. And it's just, that cost the client thousands of dollars to fix. Of course, it cost them probably tens of thousands of dollars to have that issue in the first place, right? And that's the kind of thing where you go down that rabbit hole and what is ostensibly a slightly sloppy backend problem that doesn't even seem like that much of a problem to the casual person, but creates a front end issue, which then is this liability where you have to scramble and figure out how is this possible, what's going on, et cetera. And that just eats time and that prevents you from doing the things like trying to actually grow and market the business because you don't want to throw gas on the fire. You don't want to spend money on ads when you're randomly getting people adding the wrong product and buying the wrong product, right? You can't, it's a hamstring.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about, I don't want to say Q4, it's so weird because here we are recording right now at the end of June, but it seems like, that's the big win for a lot of e-commerce brands. We think about this Q4 holiday season and BFCM, and it kind of makes or breaks a lot of brands. Hence why they call it Black Friday, because you start making money there instead of being in the red for most of the first 3 quarters, and you make all the money in the end, just because there's a lot of buyers out there, a lot of share of wallet people are trying to do. But from your perspective, from a technical foundation and not having a lot of these challenges that we're talking about right now, what's your best advice you can give people right now about not maybe disrupting the business operations? When's the best time to start wanting to think about this and start executing on understanding, do I have technical debt? Is it causing challenges with my business? When's a good time to start thinking about this?
Honestly, right now.
Okay.
I mean,
there you go.
Because you definitely want to sort out whatever you can before September, ideally before October, right? But it's a long haul. It depends really, I think, how long you've had the site, how long you've been in business, how many cooks have been in the kitchen over the years, right? Whether you've ever focused on this before, or, maybe you went through and did a little audit, but that you look at the calendar and like, oh, that was 2 years ago. So, in a perfect world, everyone rolls out of bed in January and says, okay, before we do anything else, we're going to go through and kind of audit and clean slate and so forth. But, if something is on fire now, the challenge is that if something is really, truly catastrophically broken, you're going to try to fix that as fast as possible. But that can also lead to more technical debt, because there's no such thing as a temporary fix, right? There's always whatever you think is like, oh, we'll go back and redo that later. It's just realistically is not going to happen, particularly because if it works, it's going to keep working and you don't have to redo it again. But if you truly need to reverse engineer how something works and reinvent that takes time. There's been folks that we've started working with that have had a solid, 6 months to 9 months process of, within a certain time, hours and monthly and so forth budget, just chipping away at things and saying, okay, what's the best of value? What are the most pressing things? What are the things we've identified that are most kind of dangerous or potentially brittle or fragile that we think are really going to become issues? What can we do, in the short term versus long term? Obviously, as you mentioned in the beginning, doing a app audit is great, and saying like, what are we paying for this stuff? Who actually is the quote unquote product owner for this? Like, who on the team is responsible for figuring out, like, is this working? Are we still using it? What do we do this for? What is this connected to? Because apps have their own integrations. What is it injecting on the site in terms of code? We had someone using a quote app, that the quote app over a weekend without anything in their changelog, and they did have a changelog, they just didn't add this update to the changelog, decided to start using Alpine.js, which is a library that uses a $, which if developers in the audience will know, the $sign has been used by jQuery for the last 15, 20 years. So it created jQuery conflict, bricked the entire site. And that was something no one did. Just the app changed and the entire ability to buy stuff on the site died over the weekend. So knowing, what apps you're using, et cetera, where, and having that mapped out in a spreadsheet or whatever project management tool you're doing means you can immediately start going down the list and tackling that. Having a dev site where you've replicated your app stack, so you have the same apps on dev as you do on live. Luckily in that situation, we did. And so what happens is we start deleting apps from dev one by one, refreshing code, refreshing, saying, what is the thing that is doing this? Once we isolated that to, this is an app injection, not something someone deployed in code. And yeah, but you're going to have, a roadmap, a vision board, et cetera. It should probably be augmented by whether it's an agency partner, a senior developer, a CTO, someone saying, okay, this is what we're hearing from CS and top brass and users and so forth. We know there's sort of maybe some clunkiness or some jankiness here and there. What else we discovered during our, an audit or review, whatever you want to call it, is this. And then from these, let's chunk these out and let's really start, tackling these. And I think a lot of people are kind of reluctant to invest in what they perceive to just be redoing something that then is the same as it was before to the naked eye, but in the back end is completely different because it feels like you're just treading water. But the reality is you could also do iterative improvements. And we're like, well, as long as we're redoing this and making this more efficient, what that allows us to do is X, Y, and Z, and do some conversion rate optimization, some revenue optimization, saying like, we're going to not just keep this from breaking or make this more efficient, but we're going to then bake in the feature that actually has been on the wish list for, 6 months. And make it, make an incentive internally to stay motivated and inspired to do it too. Because also your team probably doesn't want to just redo work all day, right? Realistically speaking, it's not that fun, but it is pretty critical.
It's interesting, when one thing that I always used to teach, like the brands I manage, I say, like, are there like themes that happen quite a bit with the internal teams about, well, this is the workaround we do. We get the result we want, but this is what we have to keep doing to make it, we use the word janky, but I think there's always workarounds that people are doing. And I think sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees, that these are the workarounds you're doing. That is technical debt, is the fact that you have to do a workaround.
Yeah. And that's, one of the clues I tell people is that if you're bringing on new team members, and you're finding it hard to explain to them the processes that you have.
Yeah.
And saying, well, what we have to do to make an RA is to do this, and then open that tab and keep that tab open, do this and this. And, there's inefficiency, there's technical debt, there's issues there. Also, similarly, if you're trying to, like, how hard could it be to launch new product? Why is this so difficult? Why is this? Well, you're filling out a bunch of meta fields that actually were sundown and aren't connected to anything. And you're still, putting in that information because you thought it was still there because no one removed the meta fields because, somebody moved on and somebody wanted something quick. And there's a lot of different ways in which this can manifest. But yeah, absolutely. I think from a team perspective, we love talking to customer service teams because they really are on the front lines with folks. And they also kind of just build their own tooling and processes to work around challenges. And then when we onboard and we learn what they're doing, sometimes my jaw hits the floor. Honestly, it's like, you've been doing what to do what? Like, and I'm like, oh man, we are going to make your life so much easier because we could just, connect this, flow that, like make this automation for you, whatever. And of course, as ultimately with AI agents and vibe coding some integrations that didn't exist before, I'm sure that will ultimately be a boon. But yeah, for now, if your team is really banging their head against the wall and trying to do certain things, it could absolutely be tied to that structure of systems. And so technical debt isn't necessarily just, bad code per se, but it could be just the wrong combination of things or not connecting things you have that you're already paying for.
One other thing I want to add to is about, so I agree with what you're saying, but I think another part of it is kind of the operational part of the business, meaning like I'm thinking like fulfillment, for example. Like when you get into the logistics and the operations of the business, I also feel that there are some bottlenecks and some interesting things that can happen because you want to make sure that you're able to have, realistic shipping expectations like we're talking like Q4 like times, right? But it's just like, are all of these systems and flows between marketing and logistics and the fulfillment team, are those all working correctly? And then are they able to deal with, like, I guess, the volume spikes or preventing these kind of operational bottlenecks? What have you seen around that? Because that clearly kills customer experience if those don't work. So.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of extremely hairy situations with 3PLs that could not keep up. So a 3PL is third-party logistics, so managed warehouse where you pay them to store your goods and then they get in, their Shopify orders and fulfill them. But they are usually using not only their own custom integration with Shopify, but then a WMS, which is a warehouse management system. So they have their own middleware that's kind of ingesting everything in Shopify world and then connecting with their own internal database of like what's in the warehouse and what bins and who's responsible for what. And if you have a large catalog or you have a large volume of orders, sometimes that sync just isn't fast enough and you get into mass sellout situations where you realize you've oversold thousands of products or hundreds of products to thousands of people because they weren't passing back the true stock status, they weren't allocating the inventory correctly, or their own count was off. The warehouse thought there was 30 and there was actually 15, so you oversold 15. And that's when you get into really angry customers who really will not want to purchase from you again. And it's incredibly detrimental to the business. We always encourage essentially load testing, which is let's have a dev environment, a sandbox WMS connection, it goes same for ERP, if you're using Sligo, NetSuite, or Dynamics, whatever, and just hammer on stuff like what happens when you get 100 orders in a minute? What happens when you get, when you have 10,000 SKUs and you're trying to push that, like when is that happening, how frequently, etc. And then what is also the master record? What is does a warehouse own the inventory count, or does Shopify own the inventory count? And
yeah, where's the source of truth?
And then also, regardless of how it's set up, is that written down anywhere? Does anyone know, so that when we are Friday night, on Black Friday, when something happens, we can look at that handbook, we can look at that Google Doc, whatever, and say, oh, okay, well, this sync is supposed to be happening at every X amount of time from this to this and overriding that, but not overriding this. So we can safely change this in Shopify because that's not going to mess anything up, right? And we'll jump through this hoop and we'll turn off that and so forth. And you just, again, documentation, super boring to most people, but super critical because when it matters, right? If you never picked up the owner's manual in your car, probably never look at it until your car's broken down the side of the road. And then it's like, wait, how do I get the tire jack out, or where is that? You should know beforehand, ideally. And it takes discipline to do that. But that also prevents, technical debt from the churn of staff or team members or so forth. Institutional knowledge is amazing. And, it's great to have people on the team who've been there forever and know how everything works. But unless that's written down, it's really, anybody can get sick. Anyone can randomly, something happens. Like, you just never know. That really needs to be systematized and documented in a coherent way.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. Well, I've learned a ton. I mean, I'm on like page 2 of notes. I love learning about just the problems that like people in the Shopify ecosystem, what they're doing to solve these sorts of problems is so interesting to me. What do you think some of our next steps are for those that are listening today? Because I really feel that, technical debt, as we kind of said at the top of the show, is silently killing a lot of things. And I think vibe coding, as great as it is, I think it's also could potentially create some long-term problems. Like for our listeners today, like, if they're recognizing that maybe their stores are feeling a little bit, I don't know, overwhelmed or a little bit complex, like what do you believe kind of their next steps are? How maybe can you help? Is there free resources on your website? What are kind of some next steps?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, because we don't want to just paint a story of doom and gloom or fear and say, well, that's just how it is. No, I mean, I would consider, depending on your scale, hiring a fractional CTO or a freelance senior developer who can go in and actually audit and review things and say, like, this is based on our best practices. And my experience, what you're doing here is an issue. Or hiring an agency like ours, obviously to audit, come up with a game plan and say, first step is we're going to evaluate everything. We're going to generate a report. We're going to bullet out everything that we see as a potential hazard, issue, maybe something that's actively happening. Hey, you have all these console errors. These errors mean that X, Y, and Z is occurring. And talk with a lot of stakeholders, team members, et cetera, and figure out, oh, wait, there's been this user reports about this and that. That's actually a problem. Or those other ones, actually not a problem. That's just someone who's just not super tech savvy, and you might want to think about designing for that, but that's not a technical issue, right? And then, I would say potentially pairing that with a revenue optimization phase, saying like, okay, what's your roadmap of things that you've always wanted to do, you haven't gotten to yet? What products and services and so forth are you releasing in the next 6 months and the next year? Are the ways that we can strategize how to future-proof what we're doing or bake in improvements to what we're doing to refactor and to figure out how to build these things better, and also, do technical sales calls potentially. So if you do have someone that you're working with on an ongoing basis, before you're installing apps, before you're signing up for expensive SaaS, having folks who have development experience and that level of technical auditing experience on the actual initial intakes so that they can ask the tough questions and say, whoa, wait, you just said that this is going to integrate with that. How does that work? What data are you actually passing? What APIs are you using? What permissions do you need? So forth. And then you are tackling those red flags before they occur instead of after they've been installed, right?
I see. Well, this is very cool. Okay, so it's hiddengears.com is the main website. I see you have a lot of, kind of before recording, I even kind of creeped a bit on some of the case studies you have. And so, you know, it's really neat, some of the great work you've done. So I was listening, just go to hiddengears.com and have a look. You can get a hold of your team. I think there's a contact form there. Yeah, so any kind of parting things, if people say, hey, you know, I really want to get rolling here, how do you believe you can directly service them now?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Reach out to us on our website. Also be releasing some more content about technical debt, vibe coding, et cetera, on our blog. As things evolve, you know, things are changing really quickly. I used to tell folks we needed to relearn our jobs every 3 years. Now I feel like it's every 3 months, but we're definitely, you know, staying ahead of the curve on what's happening, playing with things internally and saying, okay, this is really the path you can take with this, or this works really well, or this doesn't. We want to be, you know, the sort of thinking partner and trusted advisors of folks where you don't have the time to vet and evaluate all these things. You don't have the technical knowledge to do so. We can. So we're happy to help in whatever way possible. And appreciate the chat.
Yeah, my pleasure. Oh, have yourself a lovely day. Thank you so much for recording. This is, like I said, very eye-opening. I love the fact that there is a solution to some of these challenges. And a lot of people, like I said, don't really know what they need to do. But number one, I think is just, you've learned a lot today, those that are listening, that the fact, do an app audit, understand kind of, I think that's the easy lift right away. Try to figure out who owns what and why, and are they talking to each other? And then from there, you can dig a little bit deeper, but I'll get people to reach out to you if they can maybe use your services. But yeah, thanks, Paolo, for coming on the show.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
All right. Have a great day.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank you personally for being a loyal listener of E-commerce Fastlane. It's my hope that this podcast is offering you a ton of value through growth strategies, tactics, and exclusive insider tips on the best Shopify apps and marketing platforms, all with my personal goal to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company powered by Shopify. Thanks for investing some time today and listening to the show. I'm so proud and excited that you have a growth mindset and are a constant learner. I truly appreciate you and your entrepreneurial journey. Enjoy the rest of the week and keep thriving with Shopify.